At my sister's wedding, my parents demanded my compliance. I refused. Mom slapped me. I chose revenge. My sister's wedding was supposed to be just another family event. I went as expected. Punctual, impeccable, discreet. But it only took a few minutes to realize that once again they were setting me up for a show, and the main role was mine. Only this time not as a guest but as a bargaining chip. In front of 200 people I was pushed against the wall in a cruel way, without warning, without choice. And when I refused to continue being the submissive link in this perfect facade family, the slap came, and with it, something inside me finally awakened. That's where the story began to change. This is a story about boundaries, courage, and the strength that arises when pain transforms into truth. I'm happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment on the city you're watching from so I can see how far my voice has reached. As soon as I got out of the car and my heels touched the gravel driveway, I felt the stares. Everyone was there. Distant relatives, family acquaintances, unknown guests, and the veiled judgments that never failed. My navy blue dress was impeccable, surgically fitted to my body. The low bun, neutral makeup, and structured blazer were part of who I am. But in that environment saturated with lace and forced smiles, everything about me seemed like an act of rebellion. Aunts whispered with champagne glasses in hand, and cousins gave me slanted smiles. Did she come straight from the office? Someone whispered loud enough to ensure I heard. I kept my face serene, but every word hurt me like invisible splinters. My presence there, seemingly out of place, was a reminder that I never fit into that family mold. Sophia, dazzling in white, feigned surprise at seeing me. "Oh, Evelyn, so sober, so you." It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder that my independence had always been treated as arrogance. Early on, I learned that my intelligence caused discomfort, and my firm stance was read as coldness. But I no longer apologize for existing outside their expectations. I took a deep breath, walked to my table, and sat down without greeting anyone beyond what was necessary. I was there out of duty, but I wouldn't let myself be swallowed alive. Little did they know that this would be the last time they would try to diminish me with impunity. During the cocktail hour, between toasts and posed photos, the comments went from subtle to blatant. "You still work too much, right?" said my cousin Derek with that cynical smile. "It's impressive how you always manage to be alone." Another cousin added, feigning innocence, "But it must be great not having to share anything with anyone." The disguised laughter almost drowned out the cracking of my heart. I drank calmly, controlling every expression. Elegance became my armor and silence my best answer. It was like being surrounded by vultures in silk dresses. My mother gave me a disapproving look from afar, as if my lack of enthusiasm was a burden on Sophia's perfect event. I didn't belong to that spectacle of appearances, and they made sure to remind me of it every second. Sophia, always theatrical, hugged me for a selfie and whispered in my ear, "Try to smile a little, Evelyn. You look like you're at a funeral." I bit the inside of my cheek, afraid of exploding. They were feeding on my restraint, mistaking self-control for weakness. But inside, something was starting to crack. I didn't feel anger. I felt something worse. A cutting lucidity. I smiled with my lips, but my soul screamed for justice. I stepped away for air and found an empty side corridor where familiar voices echoed. I immediately recognized my father's firm tone and my mother's meticulously sweet voice. "She can't refuse in front of everyone," he said. "It's symbolic. It will look like generosity. Then we'll sort out the details." I stood still, blood running cold in my veins. It will be moving. Imagine Sophia receiving that wonderful apartment as a gift from her older sister. "It will look like they are united," my mother added. Every word was a sharp dagger sinking slowly. They wanted to turn my most valuable asset into a play. They didn't even consider consulting me. It was all about appearance. About control. As it always had been. My first reaction was disbelief. This couldn't be happening. But reality imposed itself with brutality. They were willing to expose me in front of everyone for a whim of image. "She'll thank us later," my mother chuckled. No, I wouldn't thank them. I would survive and I would fight. I felt something inside me change. A silent rupture. It was then that I understood they were going to use me as they always had. I returned to the ballroom with measured steps and bated breath. My instinct told me to scream, expose, tear off masks right then and there. But my rational side, the one that had kept me alive and whole for 3 decades, took control. I decided to wait, observe, test the limits of their charade. If the plan was to surprise me in public, I would surprise them twice as much. I stayed on the sidelines as always with a serene smile and an attentive gaze. Every move they made, every word exchanged was like a piece on a chessboard. And I, an experienced player, could already see future moves. There would be no confrontation before the right time. They expected an emotional reaction, a scene. I would give them silence. A silence that spoke more than any premature scandal. My hands rested on my lap, steady. Inside, an earthquake was forming, but on the outside, impenetrable. I watched my mother coordinate the bridesmaids' entrance with military precision. Sophia, laughing loudly, seemed rehearsed. My father observed everything as one who calculates numbers and results. And I, from the outside, was the only uncontrollable element in that equation. With each passing minute, my conviction grew. I would not let this go unpunished. The lights dimmed, and the guests turned to the makeshift altar under a cascade of flowers. Romantic music filled the air, but to me it sounded ironic. From my corner, I noticed the complicit look between my mother and Sophia. It was more than mother-daughter emotion, it was expectation. They were about to stage something, and they knew I had no idea of its magnitude. Richard adjusted his tie, and Sophia gave him a quick glance, as if confirming a plan. My eyes caught details that others ignored. The forced smile, the tension in their shoulders, the script being followed step by step. And I, spectator and target. It was starting to make sense. That celebratory atmosphere was just the makeup for a carefully constructed trap. Brian, the groom, seemed oblivious or complicit. Hard to say for sure. His passive posture had always been a stark contrast to Sophia's theatricality. But at that moment, everyone there seemed to be part of something that only I hadn't signed off on. A play. A show. And my name would be announced as the main sponsor, against my will. They knew they were about to betray me. I felt the weight of my phone in my purse and with an automatic gesture, slid my fingers to it. Something told me I needed to be ready for the worst. I opened the camera, discreetly tested the microphone, and left the recording app activated. If they were going to expose me, I would make sure to record every second. My gaze swept the room. And that's when I noticed something even more unsettling. In the corner of the ballroom, one of the guests held a tripod with a phone attached. The screen showed a live stream with hundreds of views. "Harper Wedding Live," the caption read. My stomach churned. The trap wouldn't just be public. It would be eternalized. The internet would watch my breakdown if I allowed it. But instead of panic, I felt focus. I adjusted myself in my chair and crossed my legs with elegance. I left my phone partially visible, as if knowing I was being watched. The live broadcast would be a risk for them too. Any misstep, any aggression, any lie, everything would be there recorded. They wanted a stage. They wanted an audience. Little did they know the kind of show they were about to star in. If they wanted a spectacle, they would get more than they barkpecked. The ceremony had ended, and the speeches began to the sound of clinking glasses and rehearsed smiles. The microphone passed from hand to hand until Richard Harper took center stage with his usual imposing presence. He thanked the guests, praised his youngest daughter, and highlighted the strong family spirit as the foundation of everything. That's when he dropped the bombshell. And to seal this union, Evelyn has decided to gift the newlyweds with a grand gesture. Her apartment in Soho. My world stopped for a second. His words echoed through the hall like a muffled thunder. People applauded automatically, smiling in my direction, awaiting my confirmation. Sophia's eyes widened with false, enchanted surprise, covering her mouth as if she knew nothing. My mother cried discreetly, moved by her own charade. I, however, was frozen inside. There was no consultation, no warning, just the certainty that, in front of everyone, I would be forced to agree so as not to appear cruel. It was a dirty game and they had bet everything. I was at the center of a theater of manipulation, with the spotlights burning my dignity. But something in me rose up firm. I would not yield. My heart froze, but my face maintained composure. Rising delicately, I took the microphone from the hands of the ceremonialist. I thanked everyone for their presence, congratulated my sister, and then faced my father. Regarding the gift mentioned, there's a mistake. A murmur began. There was no donation. That apartment is the result of my work, and it was never discussed to be given to anyone. Shock swept through the hall like electricity. I felt everyone's eyes on me. Curious, uncomfortable, judgmental. My voice was calm, but it cut through the room like ice. There was no shouting, no imbalance, just raw truth. Sophia forced a smile as if I were joking. But I didn't back down. I let the silence do the dirty work of echoing the absurdity of the situation. Richard disguised his discomfort with a sip of whiskey, and my mother shook her head negatively, as if witnessing an out-of-control daughter. But I knew what I was doing. For the first time, I wasn't the obedient daughter, nor the spectator of my own humiliation. I was the woman who said no in front of everyone and stood firm. The hall plunged into an awkward silence. Carol, consumed by a fury disguised as tenderness, took the microphone with a forced smile. "Excuse me, dears. It's just a last-minute mix-up. Evelyn is being modest as always. She knows how much this gesture would mean to the family." The confused audience laughed awkwardly, trying to understand if this was part of the script or a collective meltdown. "No, Mom," I interrupted, firm but without altering my tone. "You know this was never discussed with me. And I refused to continue with this charade." My eyes met hers, and for a second I saw the mask crack. Her smile slowly vanished. The hall was divided between those who looked away and those who watched hypnotized as the family implosion unfolded. Brian looked like a frightened spectator, while Sophia began to tremble, struggling to maintain the pose of an ecstatic bride. Carol tried to continue, but her voice wavered. "Are you going to embarrass us like this?" she whispered through gritted teeth. "If necessary, yes," I replied with serenity. I was no longer the one who accepted everything to keep others' peace. The tension was palpable, and I knew the worst was yet to come. It was as if, at the first no, a dam had burst. Aunts approached with disapproving expressions. Cousins shook their heads, whispering among themselves. Derek, of course, didn't miss the chance to needle. "Wow, Evelyn. You could at least pretend to have empathy for one day." My mother's voice continued to tremble, trying to save face. My father, rigid, crossed his arms, glaring at me. The voices grew louder, overlapping, creating a storm of accusations disguised as advice. "It's just a symbolic gesture," they said. "You won't miss it. You should think more about family." Each sentence was an attempt to bend my will with guilt. And still I remained there, standing, my dignity intact. Inside I trembled. Not from fear, but from an old, deep indignation, accumulated over years of being silenced. They spoke as if I were ungrateful. As if my life, my achievements, my boundaries were collective property. They were certain they would break me in public. But they didn't know they had lost me a long time ago. The collective judgment was an overwhelming force. I focused on my breathing. I inhaled deeply, counting to 4, and exhaled slowly. It was my way of maintaining control even under attack. "You only think about money," accused a cousin. "That's why no one loves you," Sophia cried theatrically. "I just wanted this day to be perfect, Evelyn. Why do you always ruin everything?" The manipulation reached a new level. Now I was the villain of the party, the selfish one who ruined the fairy tale. It didn't matter how much I tried to be fair, honest, firm. To them, I was a problem to be contained. My father whispered with contained anger. "You are digging your own grave." That made me look at him coldly. "No, father. I am, for the first time, building my own ground." The phrase escaped before I could measure it. And there, in the midst of the chaos, I discovered a part of myself that never had space. The woman who would not bend. The insults hurt. But it was more bearable than living a life shaped by others' whims. It wasn't just about an apartment, it was about who I was. My mother, panting, approached like a shadow. "You will not embarrass us like this," she repeated, her eyes wide with fury. Before I could say anything, I felt the warm impact on the left side of my face. A dry slap. Quick. Cold. The conversation ceased. Glasses froze in midair. The entire hall froze. The sound echoed like muffled thunder. My eyes stung, not from the blow but from the absolute exposure. My dignity hung by a thread. For instance, no one moved. Then cell phones rose. Someone shouted, "This is being live-streamed." My face burned, but my spine remained erect. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed. I felt my earring fall and picked it up from the floor with calculated slowness. I rose slowly, chin up, facing my mother. She, in turn, seemed to already realize what she had done. But it was too late. The internet was already watching. The world already knew. And there was no longer a victim. I was a living witness to a cycle that was ending. The sound echoed through the hall and on social media. The silver earring rolled to my feet like a reminder of what had just happened. I bent down slowly, each movement calculated, as if my dignity could be collected along with that jewel. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't allow myself to give in to the urge to flee. I stood up slowly, head held high and jaw clenched. My face burned, but my eyes were dry. The silence around me remained heavy, almost sacred. Everyone awaited my reaction, a breakdown, a scream, a flight. But I offered only the solid silence of someone who chooses to remain. I saw the reflection of my face in an abandoned champagne glass. Red, marked human. But I also saw something more. A spark in my eyes. Something they never knew existed. In that instant, I understood the power of choice. I could be swallowed by trauma, or I could build walls with it. I chose the latter. Pain did not define me. Humiliation did not shape me. The slap, instead of shaming me, freed me from a facade that had lasted for decades. The pain burned, but it didn't overshadow the strength growing within me. I took a deep breath and took 2 steps forward, my heel clicking on the marble floor as if announcing my new stance. You taught me to keep up appearances, to obey, to smile even when I was broken inside. But that ends today. The room held its breath. Each syllable was a knife cutting through hypocrisy. My father tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand. Now, you will listen to me. The words came out clearly, without a scream, but with unquestionable firmness. Throughout my life, I was useful to this family, for status, for business, for image. Never for affection. The pain in my throat threatened to overflow, but I maintained my tone. And today they tried to turn my silence into a gift. My patrimony into a spectacle. My dignity into currency. Sophia cried softly. I didn't look at her. Some guests looked away. Others watched me as if finally seeing something real in that luxurious charade. I will not leave in silence. You taught me to endure. But you also taught me, unintentionally, to resist. The microphone trembled in my hand, but my voice remained firm. I was no longer just Evelyn Harper, the successful and overshadowed daughter. I was a voice. The room was divided between those who condemned me and those who began to listen. After putting down the microphone, I slowly walked to a nearby table and picked up my phone. My fingers typed with surgical precision, as if each letter was a brick raised against years of control. Execute Plan B. I sent it. And I knew the exact moment the message was delivered, that the narrative was about to change. Not just for me, but for everyone. Marcus Chun was not just my mentor. He was a born strategist, and he knew the ins and outs of my life better than my own family. We had an agreement. If one day something crossed the line of dignity, he would act. And today the line was boldly crossed. I didn't know exactly what he would do, but I fully trusted that it would be effective. As the whispers resumed, I sat back down in the chair. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Now all I had to do was wait. The strength that sustained me didn't come from others' approval, but from the courage to finally say enough. The hall still vibrated with tension, but I was no longer alone in this war. Now the game would truly begin. The ballroom doors burst open with a sudden crash, cutting through the murmuring like a razor through the taut fabric of the atmosphere. 3 men in dark suits and firm posture entered. In the center, Marcus Chen. Serene, impenetrable, his eyes fixed on me. For a moment I felt the world stop. He had come. And with him change. Everyone turned, curious and suspicious. My mother frowned, not immediately recognizing him. My father paled the instant he realized who it was. Marcus greeted the ceremonialist with a slight nod and, without asking permission, approached the altar. "May I have a minute of everyone's attention?" he said in a calm but firm voice. And in that instant the dynamic of the hall reversed. No one dared to interrupt him. He didn't need to raise his voice. The authority in his tone was enough. He opened the briefcase he carried and handed documents to one of the lawyers beside him. Richard Harper, once imposing, now seemed shrunken. This was more than a visit. It was a public intervention. It was the beginning of the fall. My father's face instantly paled. "My name is Marcus Chan," he began, turning slightly to face the guests. "I am the CEO of Atlas Holdings, a conglomerate that holds stakes in several companies in this country, including RH Investments." Murmurs arose. He continued, "Evelyn Harper, this woman who was publicly assaulted today, is the vice president of Atlas. And as such, she is legally protected by severe contractual clauses." People murmured, some shocked, others incredulous. "Any attempt at coercion, abuse, or public exposure involving her has direct legal consequences." He looked up and stared directly at Richard. "Including with regard to remaining in leadership positions of companies that partner with us." My mother's eyes widened without reaction. Sophia cried silently, now more frightened than theatrical. Brian Pale didn't know where to look. And I just watched. Marcus had not only defended me, he had restored me. In front of everyone, I stopped being the problem daughter and became the powerful woman I always was, but whom they insisted on erasing. The masks were beginning to fall. According to the morality clause in effect in the contract between Atlas and RH Investments, Marcus continued, "Any public behavior that deprecates executive members or violates ethical principles may lead to a review of commercial partnerships, including the suspension of positions." Absolute silence. Richard, speechless, remained static. Marcus held up a document. "This video," he pointed to one of the cell phones that had captured the slap, "is clear evidence of a violation of this clause. And it is already in the possession of the administrative board." My father tried to say something, but his voice failed. "The decision is now institutional, not personal," Marcus concluded, ending his speech with the elegance of a verdict. I watched everything with a newfound serenity. Nothing else needed to be said. They knew. The public knew. And most importantly, I knew who I was. Sophia huddled in the corner, and my mother sat down, finally silent. The party was over. The Harper empire trembled. And it all started with a slap. Richard Harper no longer controlled his own narrative. I arrived home with tense shoulders and slightly smudged makeup, but my soul strangely light. The silence of the apartment contrasted with the incessant buzz of the outside world. I dropped my heels on the living room floor and went straight to the sofa, still processing everything. The television on a news channel already showed snippets of the ceremony. And then I realized I had become a headline. Social media was ablaze. The video of the slap went viral at an absurd speed, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForEvelyn and #FamilyCannotBeBought. Influencers, journalists, and strangers shared their outrage. I watched in silence between shock and lucidity. I hadn't planned it, but now it was impossible to back down. The truth was exposed. My name was typed by thousands of fingers who didn't know my story, but who somehow understood the pain. My inbox exploded with messages, support, interview offers, veiled threats too. I took a deep breath. I knew this moment would come. I just didn't imagine that deep down it would bring a strange sense of justice. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages and shares. The next day, the effects began to emerge with the precision of well-placed dominoes. Marketing agencies began to disassociate themselves from RH Investments. 2 construction companies announced the suspension of contracts. A fintech published an official note of repudiation, mentioning values incompatible with those of current society. And all this within the first 24 hours. Richard Harper, the man who built empires in silence, now watched his name publicly disintegrate. The reputation he had so carefully preserved crumbled due to a single gesture. But it wasn't just the slap. It was the accumulation of abuses, impositions, forced silences. Now behind-the-scenes whispers became headlines. And he no longer had a way to silence them. I watched from afar, without triumph, without vengeance in my heart. Only with the serenity of someone who knows that truth defends itself. My mother hadn't appeared since the incident. Sophia, as far as I knew, went on her honeymoon alone. And my father, well, he was still trying to deny it. But the world no longer accepted what it once easily silenced. His ruin had begun. 2 days later, I sat with Marcus in our private meeting room. He entered with a folder and the serious expression of someone who had already done the calculations. "The board is meeting," he said without mincing words. "The morality clause, plus the damages caused by the repercussion, are sufficient arguments." My heart didn't leap. It just nodded. It was the natural course of something inevitable. "You have voting rights on the advisory committee, Evelyn. Do you want to use them?" I hesitated for a moment, not out of doubt but out of conscience. I didn't want to destroy my father. I wanted to stop being destroyed by him. Marcus understood my silence and continued. "If he's not removed, investors could pull the rug out from under him. It's more than personal now." I knew. I signed the document with steady hands. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, balance, and the end of an era of silent abuses. Richard Harper would have to face the consequences of his own actions. And I, finally, would no longer be the shield he used. It was the beginning of the end, and I was ready. Now it was a matter of time. In the days that followed, the dust settled. I walked through the apartment many times in silence, as if each room needed to be re-signified. It was the same place, but something in me had changed forever. I lost what I never truly had, a structured family. But I gained something I always sought, freedom. And unexpectedly, respect. I sifted through old photos, read childhood letters, reread old emails. It was like revisiting an emotional captivity disguised as home. The pain was real but also revealing. For the first time I began to see my story as it was, and not as they made me believe. Facing the ashes gave me the chance to understand what, in fact, had burned. There were no more masks. No illusions. No more external expectations guiding me. It was just me with everything I had been and everything I could still be. The wounds were still open, but they didn't paralyze me. They showed me that surviving was just the beginning. Living now was my right and my responsibility. The pain still throbbed, but peace began to bloom. The first message arrived like a whisper from the past. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. The next day another. I didn't know they would go that far. I was caught off guard too. Still I remained silent. Sophia always knew but chose to benefit. The role of victim never suited her, although she played it perfectly. She called. I put it on silent. She sent flowers. I sent them back. One day she showed up at the front desk, and I asked the doorman to inform her that I wasn't receiving visitors. It wasn't hatred. It was just awareness. I loved her as one loves an old memory. With affection but without attachment. Some people need to be left in the past so that we can fully exist in the present. Sophia was part of the machinery. Not the source of the pain, but its accomplice. She always feigned innocence while reaping the rewards of my silence. Now she wanted to mend broken ties not by accident but by choice. And I had chosen no more. My path did not include shortcuts to false reconciliation. Some bridges need to be burned forever. On Friday, Marcus called me for an informal meeting. "You know you're a strong name within the company now, right?" I smiled without answering. "The board wants to offer you a promotion. Executive Director. Global." For a second, I didn't know what to say. It was the peak of a career, something that once seemed unattainable. And now it was there within my reach. Not just for competence, Evelyn, but for your demeanor, for your courage, for your integrity. His words echoed differently. For the first time I was recognized for who I am, not just for what I deliver. I accepted. With serenity. I knew it would be challenging, but I was ready. Because now my story no longer began with pain. It began with decision. As I left the room, I looked out the company headquarters window and saw the city below, pulsating alive. Every step I took to get here had a cost. But now I was reaping not what they gave me, but what I planted with every refusal, every no, every boundary imposed. For the first time, everything made sense. Perhaps what destroyed me had, in fact, freed me. On Monday, as I entered the new executive floor of Atlas Holdings, something inside me realigned. The badge now read Global Executive Director, and as symbolic as the title was, its weight was real. I sat in my new office, overlooking the city, and took a deep breath. That chair had never been my ultimate goal, but now it was my legitimate space. Earned, not granted. In the first few days, I reorganized teams, reviewed contracts, and took on high-level meetings with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I received praise, but I wasn't seeking approval. I was seeking impact. Every decision was made with precision, without hesitation. Marcus, now more partner than mentor, would say proudly, "You were born for this." And perhaps he was right. There was no longer a need to prove I was capable. I simply was. And with that, people's gaze changed. Not out of fear, but out of respect. I carved out my space without bending, and that was reflected in how they listened to me, how they followed me. For the first time, my professional identity was not an escape from pain. It was an expression of my essence. I was no longer the overshadowed daughter. I was the woman on the rise. When I received my performance bonus, I didn't hesitate. Part of it would go to me, of course, a new personal project, perhaps a trip. But the most symbolic portion was earmarked for an institute that supports women victims of emotional and financial abuse. I met the founder, heard stories of women who, like me, had been silenced for years. And there I realized I wasn't alone. I made the donation quietly, but the gesture spread through corporate circles. An executive with purpose, they said. But for me, it wasn't marketing. It was reparation. It was an invisible thread connecting my pain to the rebirth of others. Every penny was like a seed, not of charity but of reconstruction. I sent a private message to the institution's director. May this contribution help women write their own narratives. I received an audio with her trembling voice thanking me. I hung up the phone and remained silent for long minutes. For the first time, I felt that my past served a purpose beyond survival. Pain became purpose. The decision didn't come with anger. Came with clarity. I cut off contact with all members of my birth family. No letters, no explanations, no goodbyes. Just silence. I blocked numbers, closed emails, and even canceled invitations to business meetings that involved my surname. It was a surgical cut. Necessary. Vital. Carol tried to make contact through a distant cousin. Sophia sent flowers again. Richard never directly spoke to me again. But I knew his circle was now different, smaller, more cautious. I, in turn, felt more whole each day without that toxic presence looming over me. It was like breathing in a smoke-free environment for the first time. Family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds that sustain and respect. And the ties with the Harpers had been made of imposition, control, and appearances. I closed the last box with old photos, placed it on a high shelf, and locked the latter. My past was there, but no longer accessible. This time I was the one who closed the door. I received the invitation by email, and for a second I thought about declining. International Women's Leadership Congress theme, Voices That Break Silences. A title that, ironically or justly, summarized my journey. I accepted. And on the day of the event, I wore a white blazer, a symbol of a new beginning, and stepped onto the stage with a racing heart. Before me, hundreds of women waited. The microphone was there again. But now, not to defend myself but to inspire. I took a deep breath, looked at the audience, and told everything. From my stifled childhood to the day I said no. From the slap to the turnaround. From pain to autonomy. For the first time I omitted nothing. It was my story, whole, unretouched. As I spoke, I felt teary eyes, timid smiles, and silent nods of complicity. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. When I finished, the audience's silence lasted precious seconds before they gave a standing ovation. There was no spectacle, only truth. And truth, when spoken by someone who has always been silenced, has the power to heal. There, for the first time, I told my complete story. The next day, the video of the lecture was everywhere. Feminist profiles, news outlets, business pages, and even influencers I'd never heard of shared my speech. Phrases like, "I was the family's shield," and "saying no is an act of self-love" went viral. I became unintentionally a symbol of resistance. Magazines sought me out for interviews. I received invitations to advisory boards for women's support institutions. Even universities wanted my presence at inaugural lectures. But the most impactful were the anonymous messages. Women telling their stories, thanking me for making them feel seen, understood. Each one was a reflection of the woman I was and the woman I became. I didn't seek the spotlight, but I also didn't avoid it. I learned that hiding pain doesn't make it less real, just more lonely. By becoming visible, I gave permission to others to do the same. And together, Even in silence, we were building something greater than any family inheritance. Belonging. I wasn't just Evelyn Harper, I was all Silence women. The announcement came on an ordinary afternoon. An email from Atlas's legal department. We inform you that Richard Harper has been officially removed from his administrative duties by unanimous decision of the board. I read it 3 times before I believed it. I didn't celebrate. I just closed my eyes and let the weight of the information dissolve within me. It was the end of a cycle. RH Investments would continue, but under different management. And Richard, he would have to deal with what he built and destroyed. I didn't hate him. I just left him in the past where he belonged. That wasn't revenge. It was institutional justice. A belated but firm reflection of the consequences of a life led with coldness. Deep down, I knew this moment would come. But when it arrived, there was no explosion. There was silence. The kind of silence that doesn't suffocate, but liberates. I closed my laptop, looked around my office, and allowed myself to smile. The story had changed. Not just mine, but that of all who came before me, and all who are yet to come. The Harper family would never be the same. A few months have passed since that day that changed everything. Sometimes I still wake up startled, as if I'm back in that hall, about to be betrayed again. But soon I look around and remember. I am safe. Not because the world has become fairer, but because I have become more whole. A lot has changed at work, in my circle of friends, even in how I see myself in the mirror. It's not about power, though I have achieved it. It's about respect. About no longer needing to bow my head to fit into the molds others chose for me. I learned that freedom hurts at first, but then it heals everything that silence destroyed. I never saw my parents again. Sophia tried to reconcile more than once, but I couldn't find space within me to resume something that only existed in appearance. Some absences are blessings disguised as emptiness. And in this new cycle, I chose to surround myself only with what is real, even when it's imperfect. Today I walk with lightness, still with scars but without chains. Because the greatest victory was not my father's removal, nor the applause after the lecture. It was the simple fact of being able to say, I survived a story they tried to tell me, and I wrote my own page by page with voice, courage, and autonomy. And if you've read this far, I hope you take away one certainty. No matter how much they try to extinguish your light, when you decide to shine for yourself, no one else can put you out. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you gone through something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.